Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
And this is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper, Sunday, June 17th, Father's Day.
Father's Day, yes.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you, dear.
To you, Dan, and all those other fathers out there, right. And in memory of our own fathers. We are still coming back from our trip. Re-entry is still happening. Recovery.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what my biggest problem has been?
What?
Not eating.
Oh, you mean eating less than you were used to eating?
Yeah. I mean, we were on a bike trip.
Right.
And
you're eating every 10 minutes.
Eating every 10 minutes.
Right.
And that's fine on a bike trip because we're using thousands of calories, but not so good back in our normal lives. And really, my mind still thinks... Are you quite settled?
I'm okay.
My mind still thinks that is expecting big, fabulous meals.
All right. Well, we'll skip dinner tonight.
So no, I don't want to do that, but that's been the challenge. So today we're going to be talking a lot about cups, World Cups, Stanley Cups, beer cups, and a little bit of ornithology, and a bunch of fun stuff, and a couple of sad things as well. So let's just jump right in there with the World Cup.
The World Cup. So
I mean, who gives a World Cup?
Who gives a...
The United States isn't even in it.
The United States is in it, but we're citizens of the world, honey. Citizens of the world. And you know who citizens of the world are? New York City. Citizens of the world. And how do I know this? Because the New York Times, of all newspapers, has published the locations of 30 different drinking establishments in New York City, each of which is associated with a different World Cup country entry. In other words, if you want to watch your team, be it Ecuador, be it Egypt, or whatever, they tell you what bar to go to, and it's going to be filled with people cheering for that team.
So does this mean like Spain and Portugal beer places?
Spain and Portugal are beginning.
They're really crowded.
Let me give you specifics.
So you don't even go there.
This is an impressive list by the New York Times, some of the best reporting New York Times has done in years. So,
all right, so lay it on me.
All right, so Croatia, for example, the Cafe Baltazar in Astoria, Queens, where they say there are very few bars in the city where you can sit with a drink for an hour and hear nothing but Croatian. And this is one of them. If you want to follow Denmark, there's the Danish Athletic Club in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. If you want to follow Egypt, you can sip an Egyptian tea or enjoy an apple-flavored hookah at the Jasmine Lounge in Long Island City, Queens. For Germany, it's the Goethe Institute in Irving Place in Gramercy Park. Iceland does not have its own pub. But the
Really? Wait a minute. I'm surprised that the Goethe Institute has a TV. It doesn't seem like a Goethe
For this,
thing.
It does. That's what the Times has done for you. Okay. Iceland is celebrated at the Balloons Tavern, which is an Irish tavern which has adopted Iceland for the purpose of the World Cup. And the country's flag, the Iceland country flag, is a place of honor on the ceiling.
Well, people are wild about Iceland.
Well, the Irish, apparently. For Russia, you go to the Russian... What?
Uncle Vanya's. Why wouldn't you go to Uncle Vanya's?
Russian baths. I'm giving you the Times report here. The Russian baths.
It must
Sheepshead Bay.
Hard to see the screen with all that steam.
And here's the best part. It's not just you're going there and seeing it with other people who are interested in that country, but the folks running the establishment are in the spirit. So when you're at the Australian in New York City on West 38th Street, every time Australia scores, they give free vodka shots, right? If you're at Le Breton, every time that France scores a goal, everyone gets a glass of champagne, right? There's more. If you are rooting for Peru and you're at the Mancora restaurant on First Avenue in the East Village, shots of tequila are passed around whenever Peru scores. Spain, free beer whenever Spain scores at Old Labrador in Jamaica, Queens. You know, it's summed up really...
Well, at least at the Spain one, you would get some drinks.
Yeah, because
some of these other places, you know, the team's probably not going to score. You're not going to score.
Look, other than the free drinks, I think the best one is Serbia. Serbia, you have to go to Kafana, which is in the East Village in Manhattan, and the way they describe it is this way. They say, last time we beat Germany, the owner said, it was 9:30 in the morning, and everyone was dancing on the tables and chairs. That's where you want to watch that. Germany lost today, but not to Serbia. They lost to Mexico. Maybe there was dancing on tables and chairs. But the point is, you are covered in New York City for the World Cup.
All right. Sounds like fun.
It is fun.
You know, people are really trying to drum up interest in this because at some point, the U.S. is going to have the World Cup.
They are going to be hosting it.
And they want us to be excited.
Yes.
They want to make some money on this.
Yeah, that's quite a few years in the future. But
so
yes.
Speaking of excitement, you know, the last podcast, you didn't give your thoughts about the Tonys, really.
Okay. I know the world's waiting for my thoughts on the Tonys. Like, the Tonys, they're fine. The Band's Visit won. We like the Band's Visit. The Band's Visit won 10 Tony Awards. Is that excessive?
That is a ton of Tonys.
It's excessive in this way. It's not that it wasn't well deserved. It was, but it's not like it's one of the great shows of all time. It just had no competition. As we talked about previously, the Tony folks are not going to give an award to Tina Fey's show, to the Mean Girls show. They're not going to give it to the SpongeBob SquarePants show. That's their competition. So they took home 10 Tonys, but and oddly, the connection is made in this way. The big song and the one that they performed at the Tony Award ceremony for the Band's Visit was Omar Sharif. You remember that song?
Yes.
It's in the middle of it. And Omar Sharif is being sung about by the main character. She's recalling that she when she was young, she would go with her aunt or her mother, whatever, and they would go to see these romantic movies, Egyptian movies, in which the star was Omar Sharif. But of course, Omar Sharif's connection with the Broadway theater-going public is actually very palpable and very real and has nothing to do with those movies. Omar Sharif starred opposite Barbra Streisand in the movie of Funny Girl.
Yes, who could forget that?
Who could forget that? Exactly right.
I am woman, you are man.
There you go. I was going to break in a song, but better you than me, right? And here's the funny thing. Band's Visit won 10 Tony Awards. Do you know how many Tony Awards Funny Girl won?
How many?
0.
All right.
0. Mm-hmm. Why? Is it because it's a lesser show than the Band's Visit? No, clearly it's not. But why? It was because it had competition. That competition was Hello Dolly. 1964, Hello Dolly won every single award. Even Barbra Streisand, who might have given, I don't know, one of the top 5 performances for a young woman actress in Broadway history, lost out to Carol Channing in Hello Dolly. So there was no competition. No competition this year. But the bottom line is, we did like the Band's Visit. We recommended people see it.
But we still want to whine about the results.
Any opportunity to whine is not going to be missed around.
Speaking of Broadway, I wonder if anybody got my little joke when I said Tamsen and Dan have been Hollanderized.
Yeah, we discussed that. Yeah, I got it.
You got it. What's that from?
That's from Guys and Dolls.
Right.
It's
the play, not the movie. They took it out in the movie.
Yes, right.
And it just refers to having your mink refurbished.
Well, to set the stage, it was the number called Take Back Your Mink,
right,
which you aptly described to me as a strip number,
yes,
in which the chorus girls register their disappointment with their beaux by saying, take back your mink and these other clothes that you've given me in the past. And what they tell them to do with the mink jacket, is to go Hollanderize it.
For some other girl.
Which is a dry cleaning method.
That was like you would take your old-fashioned, out-of-style mink coat and send it to the Hollanderizing people, and they would turn it into a sleek new stole something.
Well, everyone got that joke.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, everyone got it. All right, moving right along.
Yeah.
Interesting headline in the New York Times, and The Ornithologist and the Mob.
Right.
Written by Kirk Wallace Johnson, whom we've talked about before because he's the author of The Feather Thief.
Right.
Beauty, Obsession, and Natural History and the Natural History Heist of the Century. And in the course of doing some research, he's trying to track down a biologist, Christopher Filardi. He has real trouble finding him. He first calls the American Natural History Museum, can't get him, and spends quite a bit of effort trying to get a hold of him, and he finally tracks him down, and he agrees to talk to Johnson on the condition that Johnson not reveal where Filardi lives. Filardi was working for the Natural History Museum in September 2015. He and a team of researchers were sent to a location in the Solomon Islands to do a study. The goal of the mission was to study the Guadalcanal's ecosystem and make the case for preserving them at a time when the Solomon Islands were under pressure to open up more land and to logging and mining. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the minute they get there, Filardi hears the sound of the mustached kingfisher, this very elusive bird that he's been studying for years. He manages to get a glimpse and a photo, and the bird is captured. The photo is put online by the museum, and goes viral, causes a sensation. It's a beautiful, beautiful bird. Okay, and then somebody realizes that the bird has been collected, that is killed to be brought back for the museum's collection for study. Mm-hmm. And the internet goes crazy, right, resulting in death threats, resulting in all kind of, people are hacking his Facebook account, that of his kids, etc. It completely alters their lives. And he is called a murderer. He's a scientist, okay? And thousands of people signed a petition calling for him to be fired or even jailed. Chris Filardi is a disgrace and frankly does not deserve to breathe another breath, says the petition. When he returns to the museum, police officers tell him to be careful how he goes into the museum. Don't go in the front door, ever, etc. So, he's amazed. He proceeds to write an essay for Audubon, and which is presented to tribal, local, national officials. They actually resolve, as a result of his writing, his essay, his information, to protect this area from mining and logging. Okay, so his work is having the result of doing good things to help preserve this species. By the way, it's not like there's only one of these birds. Right. They ascertained there are 4,000. Okay. Okay. And but he's in a position of having to defend these collections, which do good. Collections like this actually contributed to policies that help wildlife in the sense of pesticide DDT was ultimately banned, using information from collected species over a long period of time, showing how they were deteriorating.
Well, look, I think one of the things that's interesting is why do people react this way? And it's not like it's a crazy way to react, but having said that, part of it is it's a pretty bird. And you had the example of another species that was
the same month that his life was upended, a team from Louisiana State discovered a new species, the hog-nosed rat, on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. The rat, which has uniquely long pubic hair, was killed, preserved for future research, but there were no petitions calling for the removal of the Dr. Esseltine, who was in charge of that. So anyway, it's Filardi's kids that convince him, who, and kids have grown up in the age of cyberbullying, that they reassured him that the online threats were unlikely to translate into real-world violence, and helped him understand what he describes as the nameless ease with which people can violently assault and denigrate to feed a sense of righteousness before moving on to their next digital target. He gets over it. He says he kind of understands and empathizes with the way these people feel. Johnson, who's writing this article, actually remains outraged on Filardi's behalf. That these people had ruthlessly harassed someone who had done more than most of us to understand and protect the natural world. And he worries about the effect this has on, scientists in the field going forward. And we've already talked about, this, the idea of natural science and being somewhat at risk because people are not attracted to this. So, and the result is now these museums and institutions and universities who are funding this kind of research are now kind of in a state of media blackout.
Really?
So we're going to know less about these things, not more.
But they're not going to stop doing it.
No. They're not stopping doing it. But clearly, it's not information that they can trust the public with. So, I feel kind of bad about that. But I don't feel bad about the Capitals. The Washington Capitals.
Well, why would you feel bad? They won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
But, what's funny, so they had their celebration. They haven't won a championship in Washington, D.C. for 35 years.
Did they slide up poles like they do in Philadelphia?
Something I think it was much less violent, much less problematic than following a Super Bowl or something like that. It was extremely well behaved.
More civilized in Washington?
Look, the funny thing to me about the Capitals is this. They have a huge standout star player, and that's Alex Ovechkin. He is unquestionably the leader, superstar of that team. He has been for years. So much so that he has spurred sort of interest in youth hockey in a way that hadn't been seen in Washington, D.C. ever. And you have a lot of kids in these youth hockey programs. And the interesting thing about Ovechkin, other than the fact that he's a great player, is that he's Russian. And he's in Washington, D.C. And not only is he Russian, but he's a huge supporter of Putin. Right? And yet, notwithstanding the various feelings about the Russian regime in D.C., it's been its company town, there are no reservation about the feelings of Ovechkin. It's an overflow of love. And what you get, apparently, is all these kids now in these youth programs are skating around, whatever, their parents are watching them at the rink. And the only complaint having to do with this development is that they say they can't tell the kids apart. Why? Because they're wearing helmets and because they're all wearing the same jersey.
Ovechkin jerseys.
Ovechkin. So I don't know what that tells us about sport transcending political differences. I don't know. But
once again, it's the sports, it's the arts, it's these other aspects of life that bridge
I guess
cultures.
If the leader of North Korea had a hockey stick, I don't know how that would play out. But look, that's an oversimplification. That's a joke. But it is interesting that people in D.C. can get past that and don't see the issue there. And I think it's great. So there you have it. Yeah.
Good to hear. Yeah. I am a fan of hockey, as we know.
Right.
I have a little follow-up.
Yeah.
Okay, so, we've been traveling, so I've been reading, and I've been reading a book by Luc Barr that we talked about, and it's called Ritz and Escoffier, The Hotelier, the Chef, and the Rise of the Leisure Class.
Right.
Okay, and it tells about César Ritz, and how he basically invents the modern hotel.
Right.
Okay, not the greatest book in the world, not the worst book. There are limits to how fascinating every detail of the development of this business is.
Right.
It's a development of a business, and you read about the menus, and they're kind of overwrought. But what's really interesting is that it connects with something we talked about before, because Rich is going through these ups and downs, and he gets fired, and he opens a new hotel, and this new hotel in London is the talk of the town. It's a super big hit. The Prince of Wales likes to dine there in public. Heretofore, whenever, royalty rarely dines at restaurants, but never in public, always in a private room, okay? And he's got the Prince of Wales dining in the palm court, behind some palms, but with the public. Okay, so the, royalty has a tremendous impact on his business. Boom, boom, boom. Queen Victoria dies. Prince of Wales is about to be coronated. Is that what you say? Crowned.
Right.
Okay. The big coronation is about to happen. Okay. So Escoffier is doing all these great menus. Ritz is making all these improvements, preparing these extravagant parties, etc., to celebrate this. He has rented out every room in the hotel to watch the procession, which is going to go right by. Not only that, but he has convinced people renting the rooms that are over the procession to invite people from the other side of the hotel into their rooms. So everybody has a view of the procession, okay? And what happens? You know what happens. It's delayed.
Right.
Prince of Wales needs to have an appendectomy.
Right.
Okay? Ritz has a nervous breakdown.
Really?
I mean, they have ordered all this food. I mean, this is all decided just the day before. And he has a nervous breakdown. He's under tremendous stress.
Yeah.
And he never quite recovers. He's never the same.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
So that, that delay that we talked about before, really had a huge impact.
What I was reading on the trip, I'll just mention in 1 minute. We'd mentioned Mrs. Bridge, the book, which is interesting, about a woman who was living in the Midwest.
By Evan Connell.
Evan Connell in the late 50s, which was a bestseller and considered an important book at the same time of Lady Chatterley's Lover and Lolita. Frankly, in many ways, a more subversive book than those two. So what I have the opportunity of doing, because of the Kindle, is I'm able to read that book and Connell's follow-up book that came 10 years later called Mr. Bridge, which goes over the same ground as Mrs. Bridge, but was from the perspective of the husband as opposed to the wife.
So you're ahead of me. I've only read Mrs. Bridge.
I'm ahead of you and behind you at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm only 25% of the way through, but I'm able to compare the two perspectives as I'm reading, bouncing from one to the other, and it's fascinating.
Yes.
It's a tremendous book, and they're both tremendous books.
They are, and yet we can't really discuss it because I'm concerned about spoiler.
All right, go ahead. Keep going. Let's move on.
So when you've finished it, then we'll really be able to engage. Anyway, another little follow-up. Met Museum needs to make money.
Yeah.
Latest thing, renting out the museum as a movie set.
Right.
Now, they've been in other movies and television shows, but they're, on a very limited basis. But for Ocean's 8, they went big time, all out. Everybody's very nervous.
And the best part is it's about a theft at the Met Museum, which you think would make them a little sensitive, but not for the money.
Well, but they're not, the women are not stealing art.
Yes,
right. They're stealing other people's belongings
at an event at the Met. Yeah,
but they're it had to be super nerve-wracking though, because they have these moving cameras on dollies and swinging cranes, and I'm sure they were happy to have the money. Right. Even though it seems like a lot of money, it's really a drop in the bucket for the Met
every little
budget.
Bit helps. Yeah.
So that's kind of fun. I don't know if we're going to go to that movie, but it'd be fun to look at the Met from that perspective.
All right. There was just very quickly, there was an article about what the dairy farmers are doing in order to try to turn things around financially. And there's been a lot of stories about people suffering who are dairy farmers because the price of milk is so far down, and there have been suicides of dairy farmers. Right.
And there's also been a lot of backlash against things like almond milk by the dairy farmers because it's not milk. Right. And it turns out it doesn't have much almonds in it either. We found out from an almond farmer on our trip.
But it hurts the sales of milk, so they're down. So what are they doing? Some of them, and they give an example of a particular place called Stone Cow Brewery in the Times, they're turning the equipment from milk to brewing beer. And it turns out that a lot of the equipment can be repurposed for the purpose of brewing beer. And the advantage economically is obvious. An IPA produced by Stone Cow Brewery sells for $7 a pint. Milk sells for 16 cents per pint. So there's your economic case. And there are a lot of examples of milk farms who have done this. And as a matter of fact, the national brewer, Sierra Nevada, started just that way, with equipment scavenged from closed Midwestern dairies.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if they can also use the land to grow hops.
They do. They absolutely do.
All right. So that's
absolutely do.
Yeah, that's kind of a vertical integration there that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, vertical. Ooh. Okay. Vertical integration.
Like that big MBA talk, right?
Yeah, I think of it as antitrust talk, but go ahead.
All right. So sadly, I have to report the loss of a fantastic building, the Glasgow Art School in Glasgow, designed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh. Really, it suffered a tremendous fire, and it looks like it is completely devastated. That right now they're saying the only thing to do is tear what's left down. It had suffered a fire about 3 or 4 years ago, where the beautiful library was destroyed. Now, Mackintosh was a great designer of Art Nouveau in Scotland, and he also did these tea houses, and he was known for a kind of rectilinear, almost minimalist approach to Art Nouveau. And one of the great things about Art Nouveau was, even though it was very artistic, it embraced modern technologies and materials in a way that the arts and crafts movement kind of looked back to old ways of doing things, ancient crafts, and Art Nouveau was embracing the future. And I have to say, I did my junior paper at Princeton in the 70s on Mackintosh's chairs, which are, quite amazing, not comfortable, not remotely comfortable, but the original chairs sell for tens of thousands of dollars now. So that's a huge loss, and you can't even imagine how anyone would let that happen. It's awful.
All right. Well, that's too bad. There is a case that was argued before the Supreme Court on Thursday. Some of these cases can be obscure. This one's not, because it's based on the crime that was the subject of the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer.
Which has been a huge hit.
Huge hit. A huge
Many
sensation.
people recommended it to us.
That's right.
We had a hard time watching it just because it was so bleak.
It was, bleak. Everything about the area of the country was bleak. It was just rough, and it had to do with a murder, in which, at least initially, there were 2 criminals convicted, an uncle and his nephew, the nephew being a young person named Brendan Dassey, convicted in Wisconsin in 2007 or so. And the question that was before the Supreme Court on Thursday is whether Brendan Dassey's confession was a valid basis on which to convict him of the crime. And you'll recall, I think it was even from what we saw of the show, he clearly was somewhat compromised or impaired, this young person who was in high school, and he would not respond clearly to questions. He was open to suggestibility. He changed his story several times. He seemed to want to please the questioner. It just didn't feel right. That's the confession that's being challenged in this application to the Supreme Court. And I thought I'd read just a couple sentences from the Supreme Court brief written on behalf of overturning the conviction, in part because it's a pressing and sympathetic story, in part because sometimes I'm not sure people understand what good legal writing is. It's not formalistic legal writing. This is good legal writing. This is written by Seth Waxman, who used to be Solicitor General of the United States under the Clinton administration, and he just says this. Put simply, the interrogators took advantage of Dassey's youth and mental limitations to convince him they were on his side, ignored his manifest inability to correctly answer many of their questions about the crimes, fed him facts so he could say what they wanted to hear, and promised that he would be set free if he did so. The resulting confession was more theirs than his. That brief's going to win. I'd be stunned if that conviction is not overturned.
All right. Hope so. All right. So when we were getting ready to fly to Amsterdam, I looked over your shoulder, and you were taking a look at the obituaries in the New York Times that week. And I saw a picture of Mama Dip's restaurant in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I was sad to see that Mama Dip had passed away. Her given name was Mildred Council. She was born in 1929 and died this year. And she had a very popular restaurant in Chapel Hill that I have been to many years ago. And it has been frequented by Charles Kuralt, Michael Jordan, Craig Claiborne thought it was a great restaurant. Right. She really specialized in classic Southern cooking, food, right. Fried chicken, pies, okra, tomatoes.
But at a time before it was cool to do so, I think.
Right. At a time when, people were still aspiring to, imitate Escoffier. Right. And she called her cooking dump cooking. She didn't use recipes. She'd dump a handful of this and dump a handful of that. She learned to cook very young. Her mother had passed away. Mm-hmm. And at the age of 9, her father was, fairly impressed with her abilities and said, "Oh, okay, go ahead, pick what you want." Pointing to the garden to make. Her nickname Dip comes from, she was very tall.
Right, 6 feet tall, right?
Yeah, even at a young age. And she had the ability to reach deep into the rain barrel when water had run out in the well, and she could dip into the rain barrel to get a cool refreshment. So sad to see her passing, but a great cook, a great restaurateur, and also a tremendous contributor to her community in many ways. Mama Dips in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, it was quite a few famous people swore by her, and it seemed to be quite an amazing franchise. Okay, and finally, here's a person who's not too terribly well known, an actress by the name of Eunice Gayson. And quite frankly, Ms. Gayson didn't have the most extensive credits in terms of acting in movies and the like, but she was involved in one of the most famous exchanges, or what I always call iconic exchanges, in what I'll call spy movie history. She was cast in a scene in which she just had, as a matter of fact, a movie in which she just had a few lines with none other than Sean Connery. And in this scene, she is seen by Mr. Connery across a green felt-covered table, clad in a crimson off-the-shoulder gown, and he asks her name.
Trench, she replies. Sylvia Trench.
Whereupon Mr. Connery introduces himself. Bond. James Bond. I thought that was pretty good. Anyway.
That's your Sean Connery imitation?
Oh, it's the best I can do. All right. So, there you go. That's
on that note.
That exchange is remembered forever in a very limited movie career, but iconic nevertheless. So that's what we have this week from Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper.
I'm Tamsen Granger. I moved to jelly by that Sean Connery imitation. So excuse me, and I'll see you next week with Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper.